This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Hi everyone, welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. My name is Angelica Celinska, I'm your host, and today I'm joined by Shardi Vaziri, who is an early years advisor and early years on a shoestring on Instagram. Thank you, Shardi, for joining us today.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me today.
So we're going to be discussing tough trays, specifically in relation to maths. So basically asking the question of what's the problem with tough tray maths? And I know, Shardi, that you've seen a few different kind of tough tray layouts and setups recently. So can you give us some examples of the kind of tough tray maths setups and activities that you've seen?
Yeah.
We can kind of start off this conversation with.
Yeah. I think the way we started off this conversation, Angelica, was just because we had seen kind of on Instagram, in settings that we've been going to, and obviously on Pinterest, we've seen tough trays which were set out as maths activities, but perhaps looked like a worksheet that had been transferred over to a tough tray. So we're seeing very closed activities using lots of chalk pens and kind of, number sentences with closed answers, or activities perhaps that don't allow the children to really explore maths and their concepts, but rather just allow them to kind of answer a question or a closed activity on that tough tray. And I think that's what we kind of need to unpick today, is just looking at what we're setting out on tough trays as one kind of aspect of today, but also what maths perhaps looks like in early years, and then how the two could relate, but then how they are offering kind of opportunities in different areas of learning.
Yeah, definitely, because as you said at the beginning, seeing these tough tray activities that are basically a large scale worksheet is not very early years based. It's not best and effective early years practice. It's not really learning free play. And we have had a lot of debates over the years of moving away from worksheets and ensuring that we don't just provide those kind of closed activities for children. Maths is all about maths in context in the early years, isn't it? And really understanding that maths is everywhere, and it's not just in a maths corner. That's another debate in itself, really, maths areas and corners, or certainly not just on a worksheet. And the way that I'm supporting early years students currently at studying at university around understanding early years maths is saying to them that it is all about children's understanding of these concepts that are so abstract, so they're learning them for the very first time, and seeing them on a worksheet or a tough tray that looks like a worksheet is not going to help them understand these entirely new abstract concepts. They just sounds to them, the number 2 doesn't mean anything to them apart from a word that hasn't even got any meaning yet.
Yeah, and we know that children best learn through play. So really, when we're thinking about activities that we're setting up in the classroom, that's what needs to be our focus. So if we're focusing on a concept, for example, counting, and children understanding, like your example, what the number 2 really means, not just seeing it as a numeral, we need to be ensuring that our environment are enabling so that the children can explore those different concepts. So it might be that we put a provocation out, but certainly having a closed activity isn't really the way to go when we're thinking about early years. So we really need to be thinking about how we're supporting the children, embed those skills through their play. So really thinking about what we're setting out on those tough trays, not being closed questions. So it's beneficial to have adults in the environment, but it could be that you are, and to support the children, but it could be that you're focusing on kind of the 2-ness of the number, or the how many-ness of a number. That's really looking at the numerals and what they really mean and what the numbers really mean. So it could be that you've set out on a table, or you're in the home corner, or you're in the outdoor classroom with loose parts, and you're thinking about how can I support the children understand this concept. It's not through having a tough tray with lots of numbers and asking the children to put that object, the amount of objects there necessarily. It's more like, could you pass me 2 conkers for my mud pie? And if a child gives you 2 conkers out of a larger number of conkers, you will know that they have that really clear understanding of what 2 means. I know we've been talking a lot about definitions, and you've got things up on your website at the moment when it comes to definitions of different key maths concepts. And I think it's really important that we unpick those concepts and think, okay, the children need to be supported with developing these skills. How can we do that in settings through their play, and perhaps just through ordinarily available provision and continuous provision, rather than setting up all the time activities, kind of ticking them off our lists, which is where worksheets kind of were. It was like, okay, we need to make sure that they know their number facts or their number bonds. Okay, let's give them this worksheet to kind of test that they can do it. But actually, we need to take a step back and think, okay, do they really understand what 2 + 2 means? Have they just learned the number sentence by rote? Or can they actually show me that it's 2 pencils and 2 pencils, and therefore that adds up to the 4 pencils? So stepping back and away from worksheets and thinking, how can we develop these skills in play?
And exactly what you said in terms of, we can do this in the home corner, we can do this outdoors. So really considering critically, this activity, this learning provocation I've set up in a Tuff tray. Why have I set it up in a Tuff tray? Does it have to be in a Tuff tray? Can it be set up elsewhere? So the activity in itself might be a great activity, like you said, they're learning cardinality and the fiveness of 5, but it doesn't need to be in, I guess, a static kind of location. It doesn't need to be suggesting that this is a maths activity. We do maths over here. It needs to be a little bit more open, like you say, where they can explore, and we can have it in context. So it's all about being critical, really, isn't it? And also thinking, what are Tuff trays used for? Is it for kind of an enclosed activity where we're almost, I guess, for a better word, controlling the children's play and ensuring that it's not kind of too out of hand or messy, or whatever the kind of the issue might be, why we want to kind of enclose it in a specific space? Do we allow that freedom for them to move around, move resources around as well, or does it all have to be contained in one place? And I guess initially consider, why Tuff trays, why do they exist anyway? Why have we purchased them in our setting? Why we all love Tuff trays, there's Tuff trays in every setting, but really critically considering, why have we got them? What can we use them for in the most effective way for ourselves as educators, and for the children as well?
I think you've hit 2 really important points there. This is not, we're not saying we hate Tuff trays and no one should have them. Absolutely not. I think they are a great resource to have in setting. I think having maths Tuff trays, from what I've seen, can lead down to too many closed activities, and that's the kind of issue we've got with them, because we know that the best learning is through open-endedness and developing those skills and thought processes and wonders. And when you've got a really closed activity, whether it's on a Tuff tray or a table or a worksheet, or whether you're asking closed questions, that's the end of where that learning is. As soon as they've kind of answered the question, that's it. So we've got to really look at the open-endedness of the activities and the maths, regardless of where it's set up. And then, yes, really think about the Tuff trays and what their use is in our settings. I personally love Tuff trays when it comes to kind of messy play. So playing with corn flour and shaving foam, exploring colour mixing, and anything that you want kind of a bit of a more of a gross motor kind of movement, and that is a little bit messy. So having that kind of lip of the Tuff tray does support just keeping that kind of resource in its place. Also, when you're looking at maybe perhaps you're making potions in the mud kitchen or outdoors, you might want to set out some resources on a Tuff tray with some shallow water, or you might want to have the resources and pots of water, and it's just somewhere to kind of keep those resources a bit more enclosed, just to support the children so that they're able to play effectively, rather than the water kind of spilling off the table. You might want them to have that shallow water to scoop the water into different containers. So really just thinking about your intent for the use of your Tuff tray. So why would you want to use Tuff tray specifically, but also your intent of the activity. So if you want the children to explore corn flour, that's your science and your understanding of the world coming in. A tough tray would be a brilliant resource to have it on, because we know that corn flour is kind of a solid but kind of a liquid. So having it on a table wouldn't really work. We also don't want it anywhere near our sinks, clogging up our drains. So having it on a tough tray really is of benefit in lots of different ways. Whereas having maths on a tough tray doesn't really enhance that activity and doesn't really make sense. So I think it's just about thinking really carefully and clearly about our intent of the activities, ensuring they're as open-ended as possible, and then why we would possibly put them on a tough tray. What benefit does that tough tray have for the activity?
And what you described there, I know you used the word intent, but actually it was the implementation and impact as well after, you described all of that. So actually really considering, I guess those terms really came from Ofsted, and it's not about what am I going to say when Ofsted arrive, or that kind of fear of like, oh, can I describe what I'm doing here? It really is beneficial for the practitioner to think in that way for children's learning and the kind of effectiveness of what they set up, and also for themselves, like I said earlier, themselves as educators. Like you said, you don't want to have corn flour clogging up sinks and things like that, but actually a lot of educators may go the other way and think, well, we don't need to have anything in tough trays. Why are we not letting children really explore, all over the floor and everywhere? But you do have to have certain parameters in place around safety in particular. So I think it's just about balancing, the practicalities and the safety aspects, and then what is the best kind of impact for children's learning, what's the most effective way for them to learn. And like you said, I really like that you mentioned, is it enhancing their learning? Is it enhancing their maths skills? And that's that really important critical consideration, rather than just, does it look nice, or does it look inviting? And in terms of talking about, does it look nice and attractive, that really is that kind of Pinterest pedagogy that we see a lot as well, isn't it? In terms of, we're setting up this beautiful activity, whether it is in a tough tray, or in a role play area or somewhere else, in perhaps mud kitchen. But just because it looks inviting, it doesn't mean that children are going to get everything that they can in terms of the learning opportunities there. I was just going to say, in terms of what you've seen in settings, was there any kind of area in particular that you think is prone to that Pinterest pedagogy?
I really think that social media, so whether it's Instagram, Twitter, it's X now, isn't it? Or Pinterest or anything like that, which has photographs, it can be a really useful tool. I get lots of inspiration from Instagram. I know a lot of practitioners who use Instagram and other platforms like that to gain kind of inspiration for their settings. But what we need to be careful is coming away from knowing the why of the activity. So why this and why now? And I know, again, that's quite an off-steady term, but it's really important that we think about why this, why now. So you might see something beautiful on Instagram and think, oh, my children would love that. And they might love it, but is it beneficial at this stage of their development? Are they really going to gain anything more from it? Or is it something that you think, actually, I'm going to set it up to embed this skill, this knowledge, and that's fine also. I think what we need to be careful about is seeing something on Instagram or another platform, replicating it and not really understanding the reason behind it and the why behind it. So what skills does this activity support with developing, or kind of what area of learning is this going to support our children with? So really thinking rather than putting it out and then thinking what skills do I need to develop? Let's look at our curriculum. Let's look at where the children are now in their development. Maybe they've settled into setting now. We're really focusing on something, I don't know, let's say patterns. How can I support the children develop those skills in my setting? And yes, go to social media for your kind of inspiration, but don't get, I call it the social media trap. Don't get trapped with, oh, that looks beautiful, my classroom must look like that. Or looking at classrooms and thinking, my classroom doesn't look like that, it must mean that my classroom's not good, or my setting isn't good, or an activity isn't good. Absolutely not. Take a step back and think, what do I want the children in my setting to learn or to gain from this activity, this area of learning and my classroom, and then think about how you're going to provide them with that. I'd also at this point just like to touch on staff workload. So we know that staff workload in the early years is kind of ever increasing, and we've got many hats in early years and in teaching. And really, when we're thinking about going back to our tough train maths, I'm seeing beautiful arrangements of coloured rice, and it looks like they've spent ages drawing squares with rulers and chalk pens. And I'm just thinking to myself, how long has that taken that practitioner to set up? And then how long has that been used for? Because if we've set up and it's taken us, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour, a beautiful looking activity, but the children have only really used it for a few minutes because it's a closed activity, there isn't that balance there. Is it better to set up more of an open-ended area or resource or activity using lots of different loose parts, or even if you haven't got loose parts, maybe counting bears if you're doing counting, or any other objects, and kind of that being it, rather than having lots and lots of closed things that you've got to set up and kind of manage, but actually the children are only going to use it for a few minutes. So I think, again, we need to think back to thinking about our workload and what that looks like in setting, and linking that to how we can provide children with a really enabling environment in an open-ended way.
Just quickly, I wanted to thank all the listeners for tuning into the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Those of you who are regular listeners will know that a new episode comes out every Monday morning, ready for your commute, morning coffee, or that reflective start to the week to get you thinking and in the zone. If you haven't already done so, it would really help this podcast to keep going if you subscribe to the channel that you're listening on. The Voice of Early Childhood podcast can be found on 19 different podcast platforms and on YouTube. So it's highly likely that you, your friends, and colleagues can find it on your favorite streaming platform. So please do hit the subscribe button, and this will help us to keep putting out thought-provoking, reflective, and insightful episodes with a wide range of guests. Thank you. I'll let you get back to the episode now. That's really the educator considering, is my time best spent painting this rice and creating this beautiful Tuff tray? Or is it better spent focusing on something else, perhaps maybe being with the children or preparing something else if the children are not there? And it also reminded me when these kind of beautiful Tuff trays are set up in a certain way, and it's just like, for instance, like a I don't know, farm scene, and there's a little pond with ducks and things, and children come in and kind of like mess it all up, and then the practitioner's like, oh my god, that's like, don't touch that, that's my beautiful pond that I created with the blue rice that I spent hours painting. And actually you think, well, why are we interfering with their play like this, and why are we even giving them these specific parameters within which to play and explore? They're not really then exploring it, and they haven't got that kind of sense of agency, and even we're kind of almost shutting down that curiosity, aren't we? And that is really sad to do that. So just constantly reflecting, what is going to happen when the children come in? How am I going to react if they just mess everything up? And why am I even seeing it in that way? You know, aren't we meant to be seeing children really exploring and having their own agency of their own play, and all of these kind of characteristics of effective learning, essentially, rather than learning specific skills and just doing things in a very particular adult-led way? And I guess it, like you said, thinking about what the children are going to learn and what you want them kind of to learn from this activity initially, rather than setting it up and then thinking about it, that really taps into the adult's role in children's learning. And you can then really be prepared in terms of how you are going to scaffold the child's learning. There's still going to be kind of that in the moment adult support and almost, I guess, in the moment planning, if that's what you do in your setting, but really thinking about, okay, what skills do I want the child to learn? Like you said, the why will then, I guess, almost set you up and prepare you for supporting the child's learning in that moment when you do see them engaging and interacting, and you can then offer that support and scaffold the learning in a particular way. Yeah.
And I think, going back to your farm example, I often see lots of beautiful farm setups, but also using food as the straw. So you might have cornflakes or shredded wheat. So there's two things on that point. One is, if you are providing resources like that in your small world, think about why you're doing it. Because if you would like the children to explore different textures, and maybe if you're in the baby room, different tastes, well, they are going to come in and it's not going to look how you set it up. And some would call it messing it up. It's not going to look how it looked when you set up. But if your intent, if your why is for them to explore that, then you need to understand that's what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Another school of thought with using food and in messy play or explorative play is we are in a very difficult time at the moment, and for some families it's a struggle to provide food for their family. So really thinking clearly about why you might use food on a Tuff tray or in play. If it's expired food, slightly different. If it's not, think about how you could explore food in a more constructive way. Mm-hmm. So maybe having that first-hand, I know we're going off on a little bit of a tangent now, Angelica, sorry, but having those first-hand experiences of making with food, but making to eat it. So seeing the whole process of measuring out the different ingredients, mixing the cookies.
And that's maths in itself anyway, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then they're seeing it through to the end when they're then able to eat that food, rather than having food to use as part of role play. Yes, they will be exposed to different textures, but again, that's as far as it goes. But if you bring the food and think really carefully, okay, let's think about how we can incorporate food or incorporate this into our maths. Like you said, you've got the measuring, you've got the mixing, you've got science in there. When things turn from a liquid to a solid, when you mix them together, they kind of become one solid. And then how those properties change when you cook the cookie dough and they become a different type of solid. So really thinking clearly about, again, your intent of what you want them to learn and how you're going to implement that effectively, and thinking about your families and your cohort, and thinking about kind of our cultural capital and what we want the children to be exposed to and learn. So it's kind of, although we started off talking about maths and Tuff trays and the worksheet style thing, it's really like perfect early years. It's thinking about it in a holistic way, rather than just this is maths or just this is cooking. Thinking about activities and our curriculums in a holistic way, because again, going back to how children learn, that's how they learn best. They learn best when they're making connections and links to things. So I think it's a bit of a bigger topic or issue, but we do need to be careful of getting kind of trapped in the socials traps, thinking about closed activities regardless of what they look like, but also thinking about when we have these debates, these aren't us, this isn't us criticising people who might have set up, or practitioners who might have set up a closed activity or a Tuff tray like we're talking about. This is really just about us saying, hold on, let's think about this in a little bit of a different way. Can we do this in a different way, in a way that's more beneficial to our children, in a way that's going to get more learning out of them? So this is certainly not us criticising anyone. It's just, can we think about this in a different way that's more beneficial?
And it's so important to constantly reflect on practice and critique our own practice and consider why we're doing this. Like I said, what's the impact? And it's just about being, I always use the term being critical consumers. So anything that you see online, on Pinterest, on Instagram, if you go to someone else's setting, if you initially think, oh, wow, this is brilliant, I'm going to copy that, actually think, this is brilliant, I would like to copy that. How is it going to look in my setting? How is it going to support the children's learning in my setting? And really tap into each individual cohort that you have. So and you know, each year that's going to change, but of course obviously each unique child too. So considering maybe one particular child would benefit from something, and you can kind of bring that into your practice, and it's not necessarily about maybe someone coming into your setting, for instance, Ofsted or a consultant saying, have you considered this? Have you considered that? Or, you know, really maybe more directly recommending something. And it's also important to be critical there as well and say, actually, the children that I have in my setting currently, they would benefit from this more, or they wouldn't benefit from your suggestion. So like you say, it's not necessarily about critiquing in kind of just a negative way. It really is about that critical thinking and supporting each other's practice, and just being a little bit more conscious of why you're doing what you're doing, isn't it? Like that critical reflection is so vital in our practice. Early years moves so fast with, you know, all kinds of trends, but then also in terms of research and children's development, we're constantly finding out new things, new ways of supporting children's learning, and also learning about ourselves as educators too. So it's important to have these conversations, but I guess they are difficult conversations. I think it's important to recognize that part as well. that it's not easy to be critiqued. Also, it's not easy to critique other people's practice, and even asking a question, someone may feel a little bit, they'll feel questioned, but maybe even a little bit attacked as well. I think maybe in early years we are quite almost protective of our practice, our setups, our classrooms and settings, because they are kind of so dear to our heart, because we put so much into it, and our values and ethos are really seen in the work that we do with the children. I think it's one of those kind of areas where that criticism can be taken in the wrong way often, and people can be a little bit sensitive.
And also, let's not forget that the statutory framework doesn't actually stipulate how to do any of what we're asked to do. So we shouldn't really be seeing carbon copies of classrooms or activities wherever we go. Yes, we've got to work towards the early learning goals at the end of reception, absolutely. We've got our educational programs that we need to kind of ensure that we're providing activities and provision for, but how we do it and what that looks like isn't stipulated. So we will go into different settings and schools and see things in different ways, and that's okay. I think what we just need to keep a really keen focus on is that we are doing what our specific children in our classrooms need in that moment of time. And it might be that you've got an activity and someone might come in and think, well, actually, that's a bit more suited for nursery if you're in reception. But if you can talk about, well, actually, this child hasn't been to a setting before, or this child I've identified needs support with their fine motor skills, but actually the Lego is too small for them and I'm starting them off with Duplo, and these are the reasons why. As long as you can talk about why you've done something, that's the most important thing, because that shows that you know your children very well and you have thought really clearly about the skills and activities and how you want to develop those skills for those specific children. And like you said earlier, the unique child. So you might have lots of different things going on in the classroom, but as long as you know the reason why, that's the most important thing, I think.
And do you think maybe for practitioners that don't necessarily always think about the why and really getting into that mindset, would it help thinking, okay, if Ofsted came in, what would I say? So kind of almost framing it in that way, because of course we don't want to be doing things just because Ofsted are looking and watching and asking us questions, but it does help with that mindset of, why am I doing this? And it's not about Ofsted at all. It's actually about someone, like we said, criticising, critiquing, just asking us and supporting our reflection. And that doesn't always happen in a busy setting, in terms of perhaps a manager or a leader coming in, or educators asking each other, oh, I wonder why you've set that up. Everything is often quite rushed, and we are just making sure that children are supported through routines a lot of the time. There may be really busy days where you don't even have time to think about what you set up and why. So I guess having in your head of, like, if someone was to ask me, why have I set this up and what skills are children learning and how I'm going to support them, what would I say? Can I actually communicate that? Have I got anything in my head that I'll be able to give?
I think taking a step back and perhaps looking at your observations and thinking, what does that child need next? So yes, they're able to use the support pair of scissors with the long hoop. So now what's next in that kind of progression of skills? So if we think about it that way, we are more likely to be providing the children with an activity or an environment or a setup or an open-ended space that specifically meets their needs, rather than setting something up and then thinking, how can I explain this? And I think the Ofsted thing, yes, Ofsted, but it could be your leader or manager, it could be SLT, it could be your partner teacher, it could be your support staff in your classroom, or if you are support staff, it could be the teacher in the classroom. And also it could be parents. So just always thinking about, can I explain why this for this child, and why have I done this now? I've done this because they need to develop X, Y, and Z. I know that because of these observations, and this is what I've seen. So this is what I'm supporting them with. This is how I've done it. And the next step after this is this. And if you think about it like that, you're always going to know that you're doing the right thing for that child, because you know that child and you know what that child needs. So I think it's really important, no matter how you do it, whether you do it you're a reflective practitioner yourself, whether you do it in a team meeting. Perhaps each team meeting you might focus on a different area and talk about the why, whether it's really unpicking your curriculum and looking at your curriculum and the progression of skills from the twos room all the way through to the end of reception and beyond. I think in whatever level you can do it, be that reflective practitioner who's always thinking, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I doing it now? Which child is it going to benefit from? And then what next?
I think that's probably a good kind of way to wrap up the whole episode that we're talking about now and bringing it back to maths. We started off with maths and tough trays, but actually the overall message, like you say, is thinking about that why, is being critical. Like we said, tough trays are not a resource that we shouldn't have in our settings. They are a fabulous resource and really effective in many ways, but it's thinking about the why. And everything that we do in early years really requires us to be the true kind of reflective practitioners that we're always encouraged to be. So constantly having that at the forefront of our minds, even during a busy day, still thinking, how can I support this child in the best way? How can this resource support the child in the most effective way? So I guess, in terms of tough tray maths or setting anything else up, it's always about being reflective, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you very much, Shardi. I'm sure that this episode will get lots of kind of discussion spanning from it, which will be great. And it'll be great to hear other people's views as well. And Shardi's articles can be found on the Voice of Early Childhood website. So do have a look at those. And I'm sure we'll have you back soon on other topics as well. Thank you very much.
Angelica. Thank you for having me today.